This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Mavericks!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. The Huskies Warming House podcast is also brought to you by the Sota Pod, home of NCAA college hockey news and more. Stay wild and up to date with new episodes throughout every week. Find them on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 171 here in the den, in the middle to later portions of July here, coming out the week of July 24th here in the den. Nick Max and Noah Grant here to bring you this week's show, Nick, and it's been a weird summer. I think weather-wise, I don't know how it's been in Minnesota, but I feel like June was almost warmer than July was for the most part. In terms of like the expected temperatures, at least here in North Dakota. As we know, the Minnesota State Fair is going to be hot in August regardless, right? There's no doubt.
I don't want to hear it right now. Not because of the weather, but more because as Minnesota residents would attest, that is sort of the end of summer celebration. And that just means crap. Now it's time to look ahead for not fun other changes in the weather. So.
Well, a fun change that
quiet is what I'm trying to tell you.
Well, fun things that we do look forward to, though, of course, WCHA and NCHC hockey right around the corner. We're continuing our WCHA preview at number 6 this week, and we just have a couple of other things to wrap up related to Huskies hockey. And in fact, our WCHA recap and preview itself has a lot of St. Cloud ties to it as well. So I think if you're a Huskies fan, you'll definitely enjoy listening to this episode. Without further ado, we start CenterIceView News and Notes, presented by the HuskiesIllustrated.com website and the Sota Pod. CenterIceView News and Notes. CenterIceView provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to CenterIceView.com. Into the main portion of the show. Nick Max and Noah Grant here in the den for episode 171, the Huskies Warming House podcast, brought to you, of course, by CenterIceView, HuskiesIllustrated.com, and the Sota Pod. Excited to have all our listeners and viewers here. Nick, a couple of basically quick hits that we have to get to before we roll into our WCHA preview here, Nick. A story that we've been kind of following for the past couple of weeks, actually started by CenterIceView.com. Garrett Rowe, the 35-year-old veteran, officially coming back to the States to join the Hershey Bears. Of course, some unfortunate family news that accompanies that transition, but nonetheless, a great hockey player, former Team USA Olympian, Nick. It's regardless of all the personal side of things, it's an interesting hockey move, something we don't get to see a whole lot, where guys come back into the AHL at that age. What do you think makes Garrett Rowe so successful, and how do you think he's going to do jumping back to Hershey in the AHL?
Well, I think when you have a long career, right, regardless of where you play hockey, it's the details, right? It's the commitment to being the pro athlete, both on and off the ice. That's really what it comes down to, is those small details. And a big reason why he was successful at St. Cloud, and a big reason why his pro career has taken to the age of 35. And, it's sometimes opportunities they come when you least expect it. And I'm not, in other words, what I'm trying to say is there's not always a direct or a linear answer to why a certain opportunity opens, or maybe even so a certain opportunity closes, right? Sometimes things just happen. I'm not sure if this exactly was that case, but as you mentioned, some sad news coming for Garrett Rowe, again, the loss of his mother, which came back to the United States, asserts that. I don't know if, especially for Hershey, were they looking for a veteran depth? They're looking for a leadership role. You just don't know all those answers. And, we may get some clarification later on, but he signs July 19th, just a couple of days before recording here, the 21st. And at the end of it, when you're an athlete at 35, and she always say the sun sets on the horizon, a great opportunity to come back to the U.S., 10 years overseas in Europe, and what a way to potentially finish out a pro career, at least try to get a few more back closer to home, and just happy for him and for the opportunity there with the reigning Calder Cup champion Hershey Bears.
Yeah, boy, what a season obviously they had, and what a great organization to jump into. It's obviously exciting to see what kind of success he might have at that level. Certainly a chance potentially for a repeat at that level, if not anything more. You never really know. Obviously, like we said, former Team USA Olympian, very exciting. Moving over to the women's side here for St. Cloud, a couple of topics here. First, Laura Zimmerman, kind of a cool little press release. The WCHA has been kind of keeping tabs on our Huskies in the recent weeks, so to speak. Essentially, so she joined the Swiss Army for Athletes for 18 weeks in the summer, promoted from recruit to soldier, representing her home country, and also taking some time off to enjoy the mountains and do a lot of other things back home. Now, Nick, I was trying to figure out what the Swiss Army for Athletes really is. And I Googled it, and the first thing I got was, can you bring a Swiss Army knife on a plane? And I just kind of backed out of that entire
yeah, I think we know the answer to that one.
soiree. But Laura Zimmerman, no stranger to being a Swiss Army knife of sorts, a great 200-foot player on the international stage. That's got to be fun. I mean, not the soldier part, I'm imagining, but I mean, getting to hang out. I mean, the mountains over there in Switzerland have to be absolutely stunning. So
you mean the Alps? Yeah. I mean, not that it's not world, recognized or anything like that, but I think, and I'm going to guess what the Swiss Army for Athletes might be, because I believe in most European countries, most of their citizens have at least some requirement for Army participation by a certain age. I would imagine this is more to try to pin it or sort of condense that time into essentially a bigger chunk, so that way they can continue to participate in their athletic endeavors, would be my guess.
Yeah,
I'm probably totally wrong on that, but that's just a surface guess.
That used to be right. Of course, we talked about with Russia, isn't it? Where if you have like you've been playing in the KHL, you essentially accrue like service time, or you did before all the chaos. Yeah. That,
and obviously that they're a little bit different, but essentially that counted as essentially service, because they view hockey there as a service to the country, right? So it was kind of similar thing. It certainly doesn't, I think from our standpoint, it doesn't really equate, but to them it does. So
yeah, certainly would agree. Other side of women's hockey here, a player that Nick, you and I were kind of talking pre-show. Oddly enough, when I talk about those of us that are not in the state of hockey, and those of us that, of course, are near to Canada or in America's wasteland, as Nick would say, I actually get asked about this player quite a bit. Taylor Lind, of course, spending the past couple of weeks ago, I should say, with brother Kalen, who was the 46th overall pick of the Nashville Predators, just signed a 3-year deal. Of course, brother Cole is playing with Seattle, formerly a Vancouver draft pick at 33 overall. So I don't know if there's bragging rights there as far as the selection number, both second rounders, so to speak. But kind of cool to be able to tag along, and seem like a lot of good family trips there. But when we talk about Taylor Lind, who, again, like I said, I get asked about her quite often of all the players. I don't know if it's because of the NHL connection, but obviously a great player in her own right for St. Cloud in the women's program here, Nick. Expecting big things from her, as she moves forward in her hockey career. I think that's safe to say. We remember her as that freshman who was taking a little bit of time to acclimate, had all the tools in the toolkit, just had to kind of put the puzzle pieces together, and certainly has turned into a really great hockey player for the Huskies. I mean,
and really, to quickly just finish off that point, a player that's gotten high praise from new head coach Brian Idalski. And in fact, I believe he went directly to say something like she is the model of hockey player we want to recruit for St. Cloud. She just has that kind of acumen, the skill, and the work ethic, right? I think you put all that together, and she's that model they want to build around. So, I mean, obviously it runs in the family, as you can see. So that's exciting times for the two brothers there for Taylor, and I'll be curious to see how Taylor is going to be ready for this upcoming fall and their year under Idalski, which hopefully the ladder keeps climbing for the Huskies.
Yeah, hopefully they do. Of course, trying to challenge the number 6 preview in our WCHA women's coverage here. Before we get to that, though, on the men's side, we did have Everything College Hockey did have a poll this past week. And boy, this one was, according to some Husky fans anyway, bygones are not bygones, so to speak. AIC, St. Cloud State, the comparison there. St. Cloud, Nick, at least like you said to me pre-show, at least they won something here. They did win this poll.
Against the IC, yeah.
Yeah, 57 to 43% across 1,044 votes. AIC apparently is set to get new jerseys, although I don't know if that involves still floating a puck off the glass back to center ice repeatedly and winning hockey games by a low margin. But
a lot of their pucks weren't off the glass. That's the funny thing. It was just straight, like from goal line, just straight to the center ice dot. It was barely off the glass. That I think, and again, we could go on and break down that game we got time, right? We're not going to push an hour today, and that's just on that topic. But I mean, it's always cool to see new jerseys, especially at the college hockey level. You don't really see that happen quite often. I love their logo, by the way. I mean, say what you want about the St. Cloud connection. Of course, we both voted for St. Cloud. How could we not? But AIC's logo, I think, we talked about this in one of the shows way back. It's one of the best logos in college hockey. I mean, it's creative, it's unique. It's a lot of fun. Also has a former Minot Minotaro and Hunter Longy headed there. How could you not enjoy AIC hockey if you're a Huskies fan, right? I mean, there's many reasons actually. For a stacked St. Cloud squad, number 1 overall. Yeah, about that. We'll
nah. I mean, Canisius had us excited for like half a hockey game. 40 minutes. I mean, we'll give them that,
minutes, right? Yeah, 40 minutes, and then it didn't happen. So.
Yeah, and then that thing. I will say this, though. Had Canisius won that hockey game against the Gophers and then matched up against St. Cloud, you're just inviting more chaos there. I'm just going to put that.
You really are. You really are. Would you imagine Canisius, right? Because sometimes you have to sort of play with house money in your head, right? And that's the most dangerous team to face in the playoffs, is a team that probably thinks or knows or it's like, we shouldn't be here, but here we are. So hell, let's have fun with it. A loose team like that, usually the most dangerous. So that would have, could you imagine that adding to the repertoire of misery for St. Cloud State fans if that would have happened? Oh goodness, we wouldn't have heard the end of it.
Oh yeah, and the Gophers fans would be right there with us, and I don't know, that's a weird bond that I don't think anyone wants to share, right?
That's not a beer you want to share over at the local bar. No, that's not a happy place.
Yeah, that's not a happy place. Hey, Bent Paddle Brewing Co., Beaver Island Brewing, they might enjoy it a little bit though. But nonetheless, we're going to head on over to another partner, by the way, the Sota Pod, Mankato Brewing, around their neck of the woods. The WCHA Women's Preview coming in at number 6, the Mankato Mavericks, Nick. And the WCHA falling essentially in line with where they were last season. Minnesota State Mankato finishing with 30 points on the season. They were a good 16 points clear of 7th place St. Thomas, but only 6 shy of our St. Cloud State Huskies in 5th place, Nick. And this is a team that plays at the Mayo Clinic Event Center, seats 5,100 for hockey, Nick. And it is decidedly, and no doubt about it, very purple in that arena. Nick, you've gotten to experience hockey games there. Obviously, women's hockey actually draws a pretty decent crowd as well, too. Good ice sheet there. What do you like about Mankato's program overall before we dive in? They're, a storied program that has really kind of, stood the test of time in Minnesota hockey, WCHA, NCHC, of course, playing the NCHC teams on the men's side as well, too.
It's kind of fun because you have a Division II school essentially by proxy, similar to St. Cloud. And then you have the Division I programs of both men's and women's hockey that sort of, I don't want to say carry the mail, but they're sort of, the icon of the university. They're kind of like that town ball team that just, it's the calling card of the community, right? And it is one thing that Mankato has done well as a university and then as an athletics program is they really have outreached and connected with that surrounding community around Mankato and have really made it, just a family fun entertainment venue. The pregame festivities in and around the arena, which is kind of a closed off spot, is a nice gathering spot. There's a lot of great restaurants and pubs that are pretty close to the arena. So it really becomes a destination thing. Partly that's for Dinkytown, right? Even for the University of Minnesota. Yes, I'm bringing up the Gophers right now and I'm giving them credit. I don't care. So, but you got spots you can go and, enjoy the game or go and have a pregame snack and beverage of your choice and then go to the game. It's just a good experience overall, right? That's kind of what it reminds me of, and if you don't connect to the people that are in your city limits, you're never going to be successful regardless. And they've done a really good job of that. Obviously, the people behind the bench, the players on the ice, and certainly the athletics department largely responsible for that, but have really captivated that city and a big reason why they've been successful over the past number of years. Yeah, it's certainly no stranger to that success in the CCHA on the men's side. There's no doubt about that. On the women's side, though, this kind of speaks to the strength of the WCHA Women's Conference and, the difficulty to try to climb that mountain here. 15-20-1 overall this season, Nick. 9-18-1 in conference play. Now, obviously, you do the math, that's well under 500 in conference play, but 9 wins is nothing to scoff at. I mean, it's not a bad season overall. It still has them sitting 6th in the conference, Nick. Was this a team that, when you got a chance to see them and, of course, very close proximity to St. Cloud as far as that drive is concerned, was this a team that when you looked at them, you kind of felt like they were missing some pieces, or was it just kind of a casualty of the WCHA where all these teams in the middle of the pack just like to essentially beat up on each other? You win some here, you lose some here, and a lot of tightly contested hockey games. I think it's a mixture of the two, right? Because let's be honest, the WCHA is top heavy, right? You've got your big guns of Minnesota, Ohio State. Now you can kind of throw Duluth in there too, right? And then Wisconsin, right? With Duluth kind of had a coming out party the last couple of years. And what makes it difficult, right, is not only is it, your daily and, I shouldn't say your daily, but your weekend bouts on the ice, but it's your recruiting battles and everything else, right? People want to, and the better athletes, they want to go to those programs that on paper have got the pedigree, they've got the playoff experience. And so it makes it tough, right? And that's, why when we talk about these teams in the WCHA and the bottom, it's hard to really, shall we say, fault them per se, because again, it's a tough task, right, to try to climb out of the proverbial, shall we say, bottom 4, right? Because really it's a really top 4 versus bottom 4. But Minnesota State, they've got speed, they do have skill, defensively very, very sound, right, as a team. On the penalty kill, just a shade under 88%. So they've got some things working for them. But here's the thing. It was sort of what we call the timeliness of some of the things that happened to him, right? With that speed, sometimes it's, it's called the blind hockey player syndrome, where you get the puck, you're running fast, and sometimes you're either too far ahead of something or too far behind. It's the hockey IQ, because there's ebbs and flows, right? And you just got the feeling that in certain situational areas of the game, that's where things got a little mucky. And that really is the difference between, shall we say, teams like Minnesota State, St. Thomas, Bemidji that we've talked about before and as well as today, versus some of these top end squads, is how you take advantage of certain situations and thinking the game 1 or 2 steps ahead. Yeah. And that's what I gather from Mankato, is it's not necessarily the skill set, but sometimes the situational awareness, the hockey IQ is what lacks. And unfortunately, sometimes that lacking doesn't always make the score sheet, but it means bigger results, not usually in your favor on the ice. Yeah, well, you kind of talk about a lot of players say, especially for, when we referred to Taylor Lynch, in her freshman season versus now, for a lot of young players, especially, the game kind of speeds up on you a little bit. And being able to let the game come to you and be able to kind of process that extra step, start to anticipate and realize that
you know, you don't need to fly into the zone alone, like you mentioned, and kind of beat your teammates there. You're waiting for that second flow, but you also want to play with some urgency, some pace. You want a nice mix, a nice balance as you enter the zone. I mean, this is a team that was only outscored by 14 on the season. Heavily outshot, though, Nick. 1-6 in 1-goal games. So you talk about a team that is kind of feeling the pressure when they get into those tight contests. 13-7 when scoring first, when their opponent was on the board first, Nick, and they were playing catch up. Only 2 wins, 13 losses to their credit. Any other statistical detail really stand out for you, Nick? Because they were all right at home. They were all right on the road. Their pairwise percentage point was a shade under 46%, so to speak here, Nick. They just I don't want to say they didn't control a hockey game, but like you said, it felt like when they got further and further into those moments, their ability to close was a little bit lacking at times.
Yeah, and you know, let's look at it from a multifaceted look, right? Because we're super analytics here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. 2.5 goals a game, 2.9 goals against, right? So you think about it, like, well, that's not much of a spread, right? How about this power play? 19.2%, right? So not bad, but also, you know, you think situational, back what we said again. You know, shots per game, 26, they're getting up 33. So when you put a couple of these things together, Noah, what you end up getting is going back to those 1-goal games, those tie hockey games, right? What does that scream to me? 5-on-5, right? Yeah. It's the 5-on-5 pressure. It's, can you, shall we say, make those subtle yet smart decisions, such as you had a long shift, instead of maybe dumping and getting a full line change. Maybe you carry the puck in, and maybe you do a blue line turnover. Now the puck's coming back at you, and you're caught on the ice, right? Maybe at certain times in the hockey game, you're getting pinned in your own zone, and instead of maybe taking an icing, I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do, but sometimes just relieving pressure and getting that 10 to 15 second break. Maybe you allow your coach to call a timeout, right? It's things like that that can, shall we say, swing between a win and a loss, right? So it's those small little things, when you add them up, kind of explain some of the things that happened in Minnesota State. Here's the good news is those are addressable. You know, it's not like you can, you need to bring in a whole new roster, but that's just sometimes game strategy, hockey IQ. Again, we use that phrase kind of freewheeling, but it kind of comes down to that is being aware of where you're at, you know, what's happening on the ice, you know, what are your strengths, you know, what's happening to you? Are you being bogged down in some way? And being able to adjust and make the right decision on the fly. So that's how I see it. Is there anything else to pop out to you? Well,
you talked about what is it an indicator of? It's an indicator of a team that, like you said, isn't necessarily in control of the pace of play, right? You talked about that situational awareness power play. You know, you have to give yourself a chance to get a power play opportunity. You have to give yourself a good penalty kill to get yourself back to 5-on-5. It didn't feel like in the latter stages of hockey games that, you know, they were able to control down the stretch. It just felt like, oh, they're hanging in the hockey game, but they're not driving possession. They're not the aggressor. They're not on the attack. And I think, like you said, those are addressable where, you know, part of it is, and we talked about this with Brett Larson on the St. Cloud men's side, sometimes you just, or again, even Scott Sandlin in Duluth, sometimes you just have to be there. Sometimes you just have to experience those ebbs and flows. That's where you really lean on your veteran experience too, where you've been in those situations. You've been in those 4-4 hockey games against Minnesota with 3 minutes left to play. You've maybe eked out a win against Wisconsin. You've kind of felt what it feels like to be on the other side of that success, to find things that work. And then you start to repeat that success. Then you start to kind of buy into that system.
And then on top of that, you know, you mentioned like sometimes it's just poise, right? Especially in hockey games at 5-on-5. You know, maybe you're out shooting your opponent, and maybe you can't buy a bounce, right? You can't get a puck past the opposing goaltender. So then instinctually, like as an athlete, especially for younger players, right, you start to get out of the system. You start to try to put the team on your back kind of thing, right? And then instead of maybe trying to work with what you have and what you're being given, you maybe try to start to force plays. Now you're turning over pucks. Now you're caught in your own zone. And then what ends up a tie hockey game just moments ago, now you're down 3-2 or a 1-goal, whatever you want to be, because you try to take maybe, I don't want to say a risk, but, you know, you try to go a little bit outside the lines per se to try to make something happen. And that's where that poise and that veteran presence really comes into play. Noah, is when the frustration starts to mount, and you feel like you should be getting rewarded for some of the hard work, and you're not. And that's where some of those, shall we say, that the teams like Minnesota State, that's when they break, right? You're bending a bit, but when you break is not necessarily a bounce going against you, but you almost shoot yourself in the foot, right? And I think that's what's been indicative of Minnesota State over the past couple of years, especially on the women's side.
Would agree. And you talk about those 1-goal contests, actually pretty good, formidable efforts against most of the conference in the bottom 5, so to speak. But 1-goal games, like you mentioned, starting the season on a 6-game losing streak, Nick. But besides the weekend in the third weekend of the season where they were outscored 20-4 by the Gophers, including an 11-0 loss on that Friday night, a painful one, obviously. How about this, though? They start with Ohio State. They lose 2-1 and 4-5 against a very good Buckeye squad. Then a 2-1 OT loss and 2-0 loss against Duluth. So, I mean, they were in these hockey games. They string a pair of wins against St. Thomas together, a split against Bemidji State before a 4-game, is technically 5-game win streak against Sacred Heart and St. Thomas. The Gophers kind of had the run in the mill against Mankato. Wisconsin did as well before they strung together 6 wins in a row. Long Island, Lindenwood, and then a sweep 7-2 over the weekend against St. Cloud in the middle of January. So we talked about the Huskies kind of struggling a little bit at that time on the women's side. Wisconsin and Ohio State, not much of a contest there. But then they lose a 1-goal overtime finish, 4-3 against Duluth, and tie 0-0 for a shootout loss, technically, against the Bulldogs. So again, they rebound well. They sweep Bemidji State the following weekend, but then St. Cloud comes in and kind of cleans up shop, and Wisconsin was too much to handle in the WCHA quarterfinals next. So, I mean, this is a team that, you know, you talked about St. Thomas, you talked about Bemidji State. Duluth is starting to move in that upper echelon on the other side. St. Cloud and Mankato are extremely comparable right now. They're kind of in their own little island where they're not quite there yet, but they're not exactly struggling like we've seen them in years past here. They're in hockey games. They're giving themselves a chance. There's not exactly a lack of offense, a lack of production, so to speak. It's just not quite there where all the cogs of the machine fit together. Anything notable about the schedule that you wanted to pull out of it?
Not necessarily, because, but I think what you can say is, just based on last season, is you can't start 0-6 either, right?
Yeah.
You can't win, a season of the first 6 weeks, but you can certainly, I think this is a Brett Larson quote, is you can certainly lose a season in the first few weeks, right? And it's not that there's so many games left to play, because I think, the argument we hear is, well, Nick, it's only 6 games in the season, but as an athlete, right, it starts to weigh on you. And again, because college hockey seasons, they're not long. They're 32 or 34 games. 5
months and change, maybe?
Yeah. You get 2 games a weekend.
Especially on the women's side, yeah.
Yeah, so it goes quick. I'm just trying to get the math exactly. So 15, 21, so that's 36. So 36 games in a season. That goes quick. And so each game is important, right? It's not like you're playing above the Canadian border, where you're playing an NHL, style 82 game season or 78, you want to call it, where maybe a stretch like that isn't going to kill you. But just for morale and for confidence, right? When you start the season 0-6, and despite being in some of those hockey games, it does kind of creep into your head, right? Just ask a Twins designated hitter how he's doing with confidence going 0-25. For those who don't follow the Twins, it's Byron Buxton. Oh my gosh. So can't do that.
Ironically, 25, by the way, but
I know, right? But yeah, can't do that again. Even if you come out of that 3-3, right, it looks and it feels better, right? Because especially, you want to get your foot running. A big reason why in the men's side, I know we keep referring back to Brett Larson, but the formula seems to work, is you kind of want to have those tough opponents, because when you face the best, there's a different switch in your head, right? You prepare a little bit more, the body, the mind, the ebbs and flows of the game, and it gets you into battle mode. And I think really for Minnesota State, if they can even do 3-3 or whatever the case may be in the schedule to start off, hats off. You just never know what can happen. Again, you got to play a 60-minute hockey game no matter what happens. But certainly as you go through the first few, if you're at least even par, definitely the outlook's much brighter.
And it might be a time to capitalize on a team like your Ohio State, who's going to happen to have a really good season, but just steal one early because they're still in the forming stages of trying to find their identity as well, too. Sometimes early season can be a time where you maybe have a bit of an upset by the end of the year as far as the standings are concerned, and you take one that maybe you probably shouldn't have had against, one of the top two teams in the conference, for example. So very interested to see how this carries over into the upcoming season, of course, led by the coaching staff, the trio here, John Harrington, the head coach, in his 8th season, Jeff Gieson in his 6th season, and Sherry Dickerman in her, I believe it's 15th season. It's been since 2009, so it's been a while, obviously. 8th season, of course, for John Harrington, like we mentioned. Coming into last year, he was 57, 153, and 24, exactly 298 and 298 overall in his coaching tenure. He's now dipped below 500 overall in his coaching soiree, so to speak. Highly successful, of course, at St. John's as well. Multiple conference titles, 5 NCAA tourney appearances in the early 2000s. That will, of course, be a great reference to those who are looking off of the main sheet at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. Former St. Cloud State Husky assistant coach and Denver assistant as well. He was with St. Cloud from 1990 to 1993, actually right before essentially the Matt Cullen era, so to speak. Duluth Bulldog, of course, as a former player, and everyone knows a 1980 Olympic gold medalist on that team. Son Chris was a captain for the Gophers from 2002 to 2006, Nick. Obviously, a lot of ties there for him on the St. Cloud side. Jeff Gieson as well, 6th year for him, 8 seasons as head coach of St. Cloud. On the women's side, of course, really good years in there, 18, 15, and 4 in 2007. Worked with Harrington, of course, at St. John's prior during that early 2000s stint, and a very good USA Hockey development teacher, Nick. Starting with those two, a lot of St. Cloud connections and St. John's connections there. John Harrington has always been spoken of very highly from all the circles that we, of course, run into, especially on the WCHA side, Nick. What do both of these guys bring to the table in head coach and associate coach that make them so successful?
Well, we talked about how hockey sometimes is a game of decisions, right? And, they're the epitome of hockey IQ, right? They know what it takes to win. They know, how you can limit your mistakes and to read the right play. So at the end of it.
Did you just say epitome?
I did.
Can we go with epitome?
Sure.
Anyway, continue.
Anyway. Yeah, they're the mountain peak of.
They're the thing.
They're the thing of of really just being able to teach what it takes to win at the end of the day. Because we can talk skills, right? We can talk about skating. We can talk about stick handling. We can talk about shooting percentage all we want. All that's meaningless unless you know what's in front of you on the ice and how you can create offense, how you can shut down the opposing rush, all that good jazz. And again, they have been there as players. They've been there as coaches, so they know how to pass that information down. And really, I think really, Noah, when you're in Minnesota State, and let's have a fair conversation, right? They're not the upper echelon of the WCHA, so really it comes down to situational awareness. It really comes down to executing a game plan to be able to have the best chance to win. Those guys have done it, right? Both as players and coaches. So the record, I know maybe it doesn't jump off the page, especially for Harrington. But trust me, again, we talked about the WCHA and the challenges it presents, especially to a team like Minnesota State and honestly to St. Cloud too, if you want to throw them in the same conversation, because they are comparable. But that's what they bring. They bring gold medal winning, pedigree and other skill sets that a lot of young players can learn from, not only for their collegiate career, but also hopefully in the pros as well.
Absolutely would agree. Sherry Dickerman, of course, the assistant coach, like I mentioned, since 2009. Very good goaltender. Some would say, the epitome of goaltenders. All-American netminder for the Mavs as a player. Finalist for the Patty Kazmaier Memorial Award back in 2004. I've been told that's very good. She and former netminder Ali Altman, by the way, gold medalist, the 2023 Worlds as well for them behind the bench. So, I think when you have an assistant coach that not only doubles as a goaltending coach, so to speak, what a great addition to the previous two guys that we mentioned and their pedigree, of course, former Huskies as a result.
Yeah. And just to go the epitome is a good thing,
Yes, it is. Yeah, no, it is a good thing. It's it is a good thing.
Thing that is a perfect example of a particular quality type. So shut it. Okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like the Huskies Warming House podcast, the epitome of, well,
it depends on who you ask, but yeah.
I'm sure not many are asking that question, but what they do want to know, of course, is what is this roster going to look like next year for Mankato? Because as we've seen a lot of turnover in the WCHA here, transfers that are leaving, starting junior goaltender Emerald Kelly, who did not play last season, has not been claimed, so she might be back. I'm not really sure. Senior netminder
would have to reinstate, right?
Right.
Yeah, she would have to sign another NLI, if I recall.
Yeah. There's a process that they have to go through to be reinstated, as you mentioned. Senior netminder Calla Frank, we mentioned this, headed to St. Thomas. We talked about her last week, the former Team USA U18 player. Defenseman Anna Wilgren, a senior, 3 games played, had a goal in those 3 games, headed to Wisconsin, actually. So I was curious about this one. I didn't know if there was like an injury piece to this or an academic piece to this, but you don't just play 3 games and then head to Wisconsin. There's something there where you kind of go back to that. And then the big one, senior forward Kelsey King, who has been a force to be reckoned with for Mankato in many years past. 34 contests for her, had 19 points, including 14 goals across that time. Headed to Ohio State to make that Buckeyes team very scary.
To say that.
And then I didn't list this, but actually 8 seniors that are either on their way out or staying. I haven't really been able to find a ton of information here. So, their roster still could have a lot of fluctuation here, Nick. But as far as players that are leaving, really the big punch on the forward end, Kelsey King. But is there anything that you kind of pull from these transfers that you feel like Mankato obviously is going to miss that? Or do you kind of feel like maybe they got away with not losing a ton besides someone with some really great scoring punch in Kelsey King?
Obviously Kelsey King hurts the most. Some of these players, of course, when you're a goaltender, right, you carry 3. If you don't have much playing time, you want to go find a place that you do earn some playing time, right? Same thing with Calla Frank. And then obviously the senior defenseman, Wilgrim. You do kind of wonder, but at the end of it, the thing that I think we often forget, is that, the player and the team trajectory is often a conflict. Right. Whereas, the team wants to, build and, they have a certain puzzle they want to create. It's not always the same that the player has in their minds. So, but on paper, they didn't really lose a lot. Now, losing Kelsey King is big. Let's not forget. She definitely was a driver, a lot of their scoring chances, and certainly a lot of their goals, 14 on the year, if I remember the stats correctly. 19 points overall. So it's not a ton. But at the same time, we talked about the struggles of Minnesota State scoring too, right? So at the end of it, that could be, shall I say, a more impactful loss with one body, just because of, shall we say, the surrounding cast members that, shall we say, maybe haven't been shall we say, produced at the same level. So we'll see. But overall, in terms of bodies being super impactful, not a ton that they're losing.
Yeah, Anna Wilgren in 1999, by the way, which apparently that's old now, which is a terrifying phrase to say the least.
You cannot say that in front of me. No.
Wow. It's the epitome of age. What I can tell you... What I can tell you, though, 2 netminders, Lauren Barbaro and Alexa Berg. Alexa Berg, technically a graduate player, though, so I don't even know if she'll be back. But part of me is thinking I would think she's coming back unless Emerald Kelly is coming back, because netminding-wise, those are the only 2 that would be listed, as Calla Frank, of course, is on her way out. So, and Emerald Kelly is in limbo, so to speak here, Nick. But as far as players that... we do know that are entering, 3 transfers coming into the fold, and then 5 freshmen that we can see, 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and a goaltender on the freshman side. So I guess you are adding a netminder there, which might signal some things here. Nick, what do you know about the transfers that are coming in?
So you got Claire Vekic coming in from Bemidji, and this is huge because Claire Vekic was from a very offensively starved Bemidji squad. She was one of their catalysts in offense. So you talk about replacing someone like a Kelsey King. Vekic is one of those types of players that can do that. She's got great speed, great skill, good release too. We saw her again when I called the Hockey Day Minnesota game up in St. Cloud, and she was definitely a noticeable player on the ice for the Beavers in that game. Also coming over from Franklin Pierce, is it Suzette Fauché?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep. As a goaltender, as you mentioned. So again, trying to round out the goaltending trio there. Only played in 5 games.
Yeah, weird numbers. Exactly. Numbers that don't generally go together in this capacity unless you're getting a little bit shelled, I think, right? Like
more like a lot shelled, right?
Yeah.
You don't have a .927 save percentage and a .357 goals against average. Those numbers normally don't go on the same stat line. We'll put it that way. But what it could mean is, obviously being outshot to hell and back, but still kept the damage relatively okay, in those 5 starts. And I think probably part of the skewing of that, Noah, goes to probably just the minimal games played. Probably just have those numbers skewed. But here's the big one. How about someone we know very well? That's Mackenzie Bourgeray coming in as a junior forward from St. Cloud. Now, here's the thing with Bourgeray. The offense is there. The skill set's there, and so is the speed. But a little bit of a disappointing campaign last year. 37 games, only 1.1 assists. So I think for Bourgeray, who definitely saw her role, I think, decrease, especially as the season went on. That's kind of the bet on themselves, right? And this is where that player, projection is there. I think for Bourgeray, and I know you and I have seen her play, we know that the pieces are there, but sometimes the consistency with her is what often, shall we say, ebbs and flows a time with her game. So if she finds it, this is a steal of a find for Minnesota State. But to me, this is definitely a case of Bourgeray looking for more consistent playing time. I think she does produce in a top 6 role. The big thing of her game is going to be the defensive side, just not super strong in that area of the ice. But that's where a strength is for Minnesota State and has been for the year. So maybe she learns a little bit from Harrington down there, down in Mankato, and maybe rounds out the game a bit. So this could be sort of a sneaky little ad for Minnesota State if, again, she has a rebound of a year.
And if anything, a depth forward that at least is consistent enough to be an everyday player at this point. Yeah. So a lot of potential growth that could happen on the forward side there. As far as incoming freshmen, like we mentioned, a goaltender, 2 defensemen in the forwards. Nick, I want to start with the obvious one because it's a lot of fun. The pair of defensemen coming in are actually twin sisters, Janessa and Juliana Gadzik, both 2004s. Both 5'7". One's a righty, one's a lefty, Nick. I mean, if you were going to draw it up, I don't know that you could draw it up any better than that.
You kind of wonder if their parents did that on purpose, I mean, we think about it because, we think of twins and almost everything's identical. I mean, look at the Sedin twins. I mean, they shot the same way. They both could play center and the wing. Although, as we got to learn more of the Sedin twins, it was Daniel, the more of the shooter, the Henrik, more of the setup person. With the twins here, right, and a left-handed, so they're not going to be a pairing, right? They're going to be split up. They're not going to play together. No, not at all. This is actually quite scary. If there's one thing, and no, I kind of want to get your insight of this because I have it. When I was growing up, I didn't have any brothers, right? I had 3 sisters. Yes, I survived somehow. I don't know how I did, but there we go. But I had a cousin. His name was Dan, and he played with Farmington, actually down southern part of the Twin Cities. But when we played together as young, there was that just almost natural chemistry, right? And it was one of those players where I didn't have to look. We're playing, was it, backyard puck, or we go to the local rink, the wood boards, and it just didn't matter how many players are on the ice. You had a sixth sense of where they were. Can you tell us how, from a defensive pairing standpoint, how dangerous that can be? You got 2 twins that likely play similar, but more importantly, know where each other's at without even looking.
Well, I think, it's kind of this pulley system, ebb and flow. When one steps up, the other stays back. Being able to kind of read off of each other without even having to think about it is important. You're able to make D2D passes. You're able to support on zone exits. A lot of people think of puck moving defensemen, first of all, as exactly that. They think of the player who's stepping up. They've got the puck. They're moving forward. They're making plays. Watch a hockey game. Watch what the weak side defenseman is doing. A lot of times, one of the plays that they're running is essentially a hinge play, so to speak, where the weak side defenseman is essentially widens the area of the ice, gives them a passing option. And then as that player with the puck continues to step forward, the weak side defenseman will actually float back behind and support the play back up the ice. Knowing that you have the confidence to have a puck carrying defenseman, there's always somebody hinging behind that defenseman that's supporting that play. When you have two players who both can be puck carrying defensemen and then hinge for the other one, yeah, not exactly a bad issue to have. Both of them played at Gentry Academy, of course. Nick, both of them,
not bad.
82 contests for them. Got to make sure I know who I'm talking about here. Janessa had 108 points, 42 and 66. Juliana had 118 at 29 and 89. So one a little more the setup, one a little more the offensive catalyst on the goal side of things. Yeah. John Harrington and staff did well here. Let's just put it that way.
And let's remember too, when Daniel and Henrik were drafted, Vancouver actually had to make a trade to draft them both. Essentially, I think was it back to back or it was either a pick or two away. That was
Atlanta, wasn't it?
I'm trying to remember the deal, but it was what's his face. He just got fired from Pittsburgh, who made that trade. He was. Oh,
you're talking about oh my gosh, Brian Burke.
Brian Burke, yeah. Masterminded that. We talk about chemistry in hockey, and just it's one of those you can't teach those kind of things, but it has some most impactful things. And Noah, how it for those who maybe have never played the game but watched it and understand it pretty well, the higher end talent, you're not thinking the game, you're just doing it. It's instinctual, right? When I had the chance to interview Andrew Brunette back in 2013, 10-year anniversary ago, was actually a MinnesotaWild.com piece. And I sat down with him for about 25, 30 minutes, and I had him break down essentially when he got the puck from Sergei Zholtok. And I said, he draws other defensemen over. They collide, right? It's you and Patrick Waugh. And I'm like, what was going through your head? He's like,
Nothing.
Literally nothing. He was like, the only thing I kind of sort of thought was I need to give him something he isn't expecting. And if you watch him do it, he just sort of, he just like
stepped to the left. Yeah.
He just carried the puck in, Waugh went down, and then he just took it around to the backhand, and it was a wide open net. He just essentially outweighted him. And those are the types of plays where, especially in Stanley Cup playoff action overtime, there's emotions, there's adrenaline, and when you get an opportunity like that, a breakaway, and mind you, it's kind of a half breakaway at that point. You're probably not expecting that open ice. And he admitted, it's like, no, absolutely not. I did not think I was going to have a clean look. He's like, and just, you kind of go black, right? You just do it.
Well, you talked about too, what is the tendency in that situation? You get the puck, you want to get it off quickly. To have that patience and poise, that shows, that experience too. And I think that when I always tell people, they always ask, like what goes on in your head during a hockey game? And I say at a high level, hockey is interesting because you're thinking all the time, but you're not thinking at all. You're doing both. It's like your mind and your hockey IQ catches up to your body being able to make those plays. And you are thinking through the game. You are piecing it together, but you don't realize you're doing it so naturally because of the repetition, because of the muscle memory, because you've seen those plays. Then when you get into those moments, like you said, when we talked about playoff success, you've been there. You feel it. Then you're able to put all those pieces together and then manage the emotional piece on top of it. If they can get these two freshman gals up to speed quickly, Nick,
I think they will be just fine.
Yeah, definitely would agree. On the forward side, three forwards here. I'm going to butcher this name, and I apologize well in advance here. Ava Guglielmetti, I think.
Sounds right.
Guglielmetti, a tough one. All I can tell you, Nick, prior Lake product, 5 years for her, 117 games played, 99 points in those contests, 43 goals, 56 assists. Not too shabby. And Cameron Van Batavia. We have some names, Nick, that I'm just going to butcher. Laverne, Minnesota product, by the way. Lots of years there. In fact, actually 6 at the high school level. So that kind of gives you
a 7th grader. Holy cow.
I say that gives you an idea. Nick, is this good? 100. Let's just put it this way. I don't know if you have the stat sheet up, but if you do, don't pull her Elite Prospects page up. If you have already, tell me.
No.
Okay. 151 games played, Nick, in those 6 years. What do you think the point total is?
Ooh, I'm gonna take what they call a swing of the bat, 172.
440.
Holy blank.
283 goals, 157 assists, a 2.91 point per game clip. Oh, and 50 PIMs to go along with that.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure.
Because I kind of lied. I had the Elite Prospects Minnesota State page up.
Yeah.
What kind of helps her is she's a beast. She's 6'0". She's huge.
Yeah.
You probably hear this for those listening. You talk about size, and it's not everything, sure, but you talk about the reach and the ways that you can move the puck laterally with your stick. That there is an advantage there, and not to mention your stride, right? So, yikes.
Yeah, pretty
Yikes.
good. And then Lauren Zawoyski, I think, 3 years at Edina, 80 games played for her, 25 goals, 36 assists, 61 points, just to tag along on that train, by the way, too, playing at a very good school. And Nick, this is a team, and we haven't even gotten to the netminder yet. On the forward side here, you were trying to replenish some offense. This Mankato team, yes, we have them picked below the Huskies right now. This is a team that I can't really get a read on. And the only thing I can't get a read on, we'll talk about the net mining in a second. Goaltending is a question mark for them as we're gonna go through. And just the overall depth. But if these freshmen can be as high end as they were at the previous level. Now, it doesn't always translate. We've seen a lot of women's hockey players that do bring great stat totals that have either played at a school that was not that competitive by nature, or, they just, for whatever reason, don't translate. You got to kind of wait and see here, Nick. But if these three forwards bring the success, like you mentioned, and obviously one of them with significant size and reach and ability, 6'0", very tall for the women's game, it will not be a bad time to be a Mankato Maverick.
No, and I think really to summarize it, a little bit more in pace here, Noah, the big question is assimilation, really, from the level that they're at to the Division I level to the WCHA, right? There's no question the raw skill, the raw talents there. Now the question is, can they assimilate to just a different beast, right? The game is quicker. You have obviously your opposing talent is going to be at your level, if not better than you. So how do you adjust, right? But if this is a core, including the defensemen, right, that seem to be more offensive minded, if they replicate similar to their defensive metrics of last season, this could be a big swing up for Minnesota State if these freshmen can adjust quick.
Yeah, and on the net mining side, coming in here from Blaine High School, it's Haley Hansen. Of course, her father, really successful career in Charlestown for a long time. So no, but 3 years at that level, 133 goals against and a .931 save percentage at MNHP, and then at the high school level, a .923 over 5 years, 125 contests and a .265 goals against, was 64, 56, and 5. So again, numbers that if they can assimilate will translate very, very well, Nick. There's no doubt about that. Net minding, always an essential factor when it comes to the game of hockey. Returning players, Nick, kind of hard to get a read, like we mentioned, with all these graduate players. Will they stay? Will they go? Some of them, I would imagine, have to be. But as far as we can see, 5 freshmen, 5 sophomores, 5 juniors, and 5 to 6 seniors, depending on what Emerald Kelly does, and then 8 graduate players potentially, if you want to be honest. So 21 to 29 would be the mix, somewhere in there. But Nick, players that, of course, are returners. You look at Jamie Nelson, who is a junior, had 26 points last season. Claire Budarak, a graduate player, should she decide to stay, with 23 points on the year. Madison Meshuggah had 22 points last season. So bringing back, Taylor Otremba as well, Brooke Bryant, if she stays. So you talk about Kelsey King and what she brought to the table. She was essentially tied for 5th as the 5th highest scorer on this team. So they are bringing back some offense, Nick. Again, this is a team that could finish much higher than where they were at if they get decent goaltending and can lock down defensively. So how do we qualify this, Nick, where we look at this team that you can tell they have some offensive players, especially on the forward side, that can do some damage? What was it about last season, and what do they kind of need to take away from that to really make things stick? Because clearly they've got some players that can produce and can create some offense.
I think 60 minutes, right, is really what it comes down to, is consistency, right? we probably say this ad nauseum, right? But for a lot of the teams and players at this level, right, collegiate, Division I, pros, it's not really a lot of the X's and O's. It's more just, can you execute it more consistently than your opponent, right? And when you bring in some of these more offensive minded folks, right? If that's more depth scoring, or shall we say more of an offensive threat, more than your top 6, and now maybe you've got a top 9 that can at least provide you a little bit of a spark. Teams have to contend with that. Now, what does that mean? That takes pressure off your defensemen, pressure off your goaltending. And what it means is you're forcing your opponent to defend more. You're usually putting more shots on that. You're creating more power plays, because usually when you're controlling possession, you're driving, the puck forward, you're making your opponent chase, right? And that's where a lot of the stick infractions come from. So it's a trickle down effect, right? So at the end of it, if Mankato was able to, like I mentioned before, be able to just take what they're given defensively, which they've been pretty good. Again, their penalty kill, one of the best in the nation at just a clip under 88%, but maybe get a little bit more success in the power play, but more importantly, 5-on-5, right? And then, when the going gets tough and the tough got to get going. I know it's a horrible cliche phrase, but, more so get going and just not deviating, right? You just got to make sure you stick with the process, stick with what the game plan is. And, you may not get all the bounces right. In fact, you may do everything right. There, how many times have we talked on this podcast, right, where St. Cloud, they did everything right, they just could not buy a bounce, right? But you'd rather see a loss like that than versus like a total implosion where you can see the game plan unwinding in front of you. That's the loss that you don't want to see. You'd rather see a close game and a loss where you can say that you played good hockey, just didn't get the will of the hockey gods sometimes, and that happens in the sport more often than not.
Yeah, giving yourself a chance is half the battle. I definitely would agree. They have a chance in their first 4 games of the season. They will be on the road, only 2 non-conference games before they get right into WCHA action. They're actually in Connecticut to play Sacred Heart, which last year they had good success against. Before being on the road to visit Anna Wilgren and the Wisconsin Badgers, October 12th and 13th in Wisconsin. Their first home matchup is October 20th and 21st. In fact, a 4-game homestand against Duluth, and the first time they see St. Cloud at the tail end of October. Then they are home and home early part of November against Minnesota and the Gophers. They are on the road and then at home respectively that weekend. And then the really cool part here, Nick, November 9th on a Thursday, they play St. Thomas in the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame game at Maple Grove, Nick. This will be an exciting matchup, of course. The Huskies, no stranger to this game, obviously had very good success, of course, against the Gophers last year. But, Nick, Hockey Hall of Fame game, always got to be exciting. The only challenge, of course, is they play on that Thursday. Then they're off essentially for a week before coming back the following Friday. So it's a weekend, essentially, that they don't play after that Thursday game, but nonetheless got to be an exciting matchup, I would imagine.
It is, anytime that you're in a marquee matchup like that, it's always exciting to be able to kind of, be part of a showcase kind of game, which is what this is. And what makes it even more tough, Noah, you mentioned the layoff after the game. How about the short turnaround from the University of Minnesota the weekend prior, that Friday, Saturday? Yeah. It's a home and home too. So, there's some travel there, but then you got to rest up quick because, again, that Thursday game comes quicker than probably we think, right? So you do have a quick turnover, then you get to, shall we say, rest up a bit for your next game. But always fun to be in some of those matchups, like you mentioned, with the Hall of Fame game there early in November.
Yeah, a bit road heavy here, to say the least. November 17th and 18th, they're actually in Bemidji. And then, Nick, how about this? They're in the Smashville Classic over the Thanksgiving holiday. They play Robert Morris and Boston University at Nashville, Tennessee. So, yeah, I would say if you're a Mavs player, you're going to be doing some traveling. You're going to be having some fun road trips. There's no doubt about that. Home and home against St. Thomas to start December, on the road again. Essentially for 3 straight, if you want to count the second game against St. Thomas. Then they play Ohio State on the road, and then it's Christmas time. They get to breathe a little bit. At home against Lindenwood for some non-conference action. On the road, not too far, in St. Cloud, before playing Wisconsin at home. Home and home, where they travel to Minnesota first, and then they're at home at the end of the weekend against the Gophers. On the road against Duluth, and then closing out essentially the second half of the schedule, home stands against Ohio State, Bemidji State, and a home game against St. Thomas before the regular season ends in St. Thomas, February 24th. So I think you and I can probably, clarify what this is going to be. They're one of their biggest challenges, Nick: rest, travel, recuperation.
Yeah. You don't pick the schedule, obviously, as a player, but you do have to manage it, right? This is where, sleep and nutrition and all that good jazz, having a routine in place is super important, right? Because we talk about how athletes are creatures of habit. They're going to have a good road habit, right? Because again, we talk about on the extreme cases, what traveling to like Alaska does. They're starting the season on the East Coast in Connecticut. They'll be flying out, so they're going to get a taste of that early on. And being with a road heavy first half of their schedule, being on there, that should at least set the tone early, which is good. But then again, you're going to finish, and I know you'll hit this. 5 out of last 6 will be on home ice, so that'll be nice. But again, it's going to be a mental test earlier. But if they can, essentially, rise to it and just, look at it as this is just how the dice fell to us this year, and just not make it part of, shall we say, not let it have you approach it differently, maybe, is what I was trying to go for, Noah, then you'll be just fine.
Yeah, and obviously the road trip's not exactly extensive for some of the in-state teams, so I mean, you're close enough, so to speak, but regardless, you have to manage that schedule. Now, Nick, final couple of questions here. First of all, I mean, this team, if they get a little bit of goaltending help, the freshmen assimilate well, and they, can bring those returning scores up to form. This is a team that could finish 4th or even in a long shot here, maybe even 3rd in this conference. I mean, they're probably the biggest wild card, or one of them, that we have entering this season. They could finish much higher than where we have them, but they have to manage the schedule. All of those things have to happen, or at least a majority of them, for things to go right. What do they have to do to be successful if they want to challenge for a home spot in the WCHA?
I think early on, you have to establish the defensive game, right? That's always the one thing that is hard to, like, shall we say, recoup as the season goes on. You have to start strong. And typically although we talked about the offensive talent that comes in, you'd rather have the defense first, build the offense later. So to me, you stay structured defensively, you protect your goaltender, you clear out rebounds, you protect the house, right? You're in the blue paint areas, making it difficult for your opponent to get into those high danger areas. And then as the season progresses, this is when the transition game develops. This is when you're driving and then looking at those, rush plays, and then going in and talk about scissoring and going all the way down to a 3-2, on the forecheck, and expanding that way. And that's going to allow your freshmen to really just kind of settle in and not have too much pressure, right? I think, especially with some of their higher end talents, there's an expectation on themselves, right, to be able to replicate some of that production. Let's be realistic, isn't going to happen, right? You can tell that player over and over again, right? You're not going to be the best, you're not going to be an ESPN top 10 player this year, but just keep it simple, right? So to me, build defense first, protect the goaltending, and then offense will follow later. If you can follow that, I think they're going to put themselves in a pretty good position to battle for a top 4 of the WCHA, and perhaps even higher, right, if the dice roll in their favor.
Yeah, my biggest thing for them, they got to figure out who their starter is, or what their goaltending tandem is for them. Obviously, is it going to be Haley Hansen, who's going to come in as the freshman and make some noise? Does Alexa Berg stay, who had a 9.16 last season and a 2.81 in 21 contests? Lauren Barbaro will be a senior this upcoming year, played in 17 contests, that comparable records for them, 8-7 and 7-10 respectively. She had a 9.11 and a 2.98. So again, similar in goaltending numbers. Does the freshman challenge out of camp, or do they go with the veteran presence, or do they do a tandem switch here, or are they going to carry 3 goaltenders? Are they going to do what we've seen other teams in the WCH do? Yeah, a redshirt freshman, carry 4 goaltenders. A lot of options on the table. They've got to figure that out, I think. And like you said, work from the back end up. And if you have 2 freshmen, twin defensemen who bring any sort of similar production, working from the back end up will be not a difficult task for this team if they are successful. Nick, before we get to our final question here, just want to mention the Husky Warming House podcast is brought to you by the Sota Pod. Stay wild and up to date in all things in the state of hockey, as well as CenterIceView.com. Some great stories coming from Bill Prout over the past couple of weeks. Huskies Illustrated, excited as the season gets rolling to see some of those pictures on the men's and women's side. Some great content coming out of that. Of course, your home for all things St. Cloud hockey, including the latest news and photos of your favorite Huskies. Nick, speaking of our Huskies, they do have these Mankato Mavericks on the women's side 4 times this season, once in the first half, once in the second half. What does St. Cloud do to be successful and shut down these high-flying freshman players?
Well, I think you got to go right at him, right? I think you got to give him a taste of what Division I hockey is, right? And that's fast paced. It's heavy, and more so, it's about puck control and puck management, really. In high school and some other of those, shall we say, those junior tiers, right? Some of those mistakes you make, you kind of get away with. Division I, you don't, right? So you can force them to make, shall we say, a rush decision, right? That's where a lot of the freshmen struggle, is when the game come at you a little bit faster than you're anticipating, right? We always talk about that transition between levels of hockey, and one thing we hear about from players a lot is the speed of the game, right? So to me, you go at them, you attack the freshmen hard, and you just essentially try to make them almost beat themselves, right? By creating turnovers and then capitalizing, right? To me, that's how you do it. I know it sounds simple, but to me, you just kind of go right at them and bring the game to them, not allowing them to feel comfortable where they can, shall we say, use their talents, which they've got plenty of them, to be able to counteract that. That's how you beat a young but still skilled Minnesota State squad.
Certainly would agree, Nick. Of course, next week we move into the NCHC number 6 is on the docket. We won't reveal who that is. Now, to clarify, as we move forward here, I'm going to give a bit of a spoiler here. We do have St. Cloud on the women's side ranked at number 5. So next week we will, oh my goodness, we will be covering the number 4 team in the WCHA. So if you see number 4, no, it's not a typo. I did have a typo earlier in the past week though. So for real, this one isn't a typo.
Mistakes. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm like the epitome of podcast typing. But just so you know, we'll be out of order slightly when it comes to those, and it's not a typo. We are going to rank them as they are ranked according to our predictions. So it'll actually be the number 4 spot in the WCHA in 2 weeks, number 6 next week on the men's side. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Mavericks!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.